Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1071B, and today's date is September 9th, 2016, and the title of the episode is U.S. Government Agenda, Provoke, Provoke, and Provoke. Now, before I get started, I have an announcement to make. Tomorrow morning, Saturday, I'll be uploading an interview with David Robertson. He's the author of An American Warning. So if you're on the X22 Report email alert system, I will send you an email. If you subscribe to YouTube, YouTube should send you an email. If not, just go right over to the YouTube channel by going to YouTube, typing in X22 Report Spotlight, bring you right to the video. Or you can come over to News Sentinel or X22report.com. All you need to do is scroll down a little bit, look over to your right-hand side, you'll see the video there, and you can play the interview right there. Let's get into the economic collapse, political and geopolitical news. Now, we can see the U.S. government central bankers, they are pushing the Zika virus very hard, and we talked about how Obama wrote an executive order, offshored the vaccine development with the Takeda company, but Joe Biden, the vice president, called on the U.S. Congress to allow an up or down vote on funding to combat the Zika virus. And remember, the bill was turned down. But he's saying, let's do this without any other provisions attached to it. Because he's saying that the Zika virus now is a national emergency, which is very interesting. Because we can see the World Health Organization, the CDC, they're pushing the idea that this is spreading like crazy, and it's getting worse and worse as time goes on. And we know at this point that the Zika virus is a weapon the U.S. government central bankers are going to use. And a listener wrote in, Jules, and this listener told me that the Takeda company that's developing this vaccine, one of the major shareholders is J.P. Morgan Chase. Not once, but twice on the top of the shareholder list, which is very interesting in itself. Because we could see right now that they're going to be using this Zika virus for an agenda. And this agenda could be maybe during the elections, during the economic collapse as everything's falling apart, might be used to declare martial law, to say, okay, we're in a state of emergency, because they're already calling it a national emergency. So the U.S. government central bankers, they created this problem, and once the problem is spread and they make everyone believe that there's this major problem, they're going to have a solution, and the solution will be vaccines. We see the 9/11 bill to sue Saudi Arabia has been passed by the House. And it is on its way to the president. And the president has hinted that he will veto the bill. Well, we'll have to wait and see. We know for a fact that Saudi Arabia, they were not the cause of the towers coming down. They didn't do this themselves. The question is, why would they do this? What would be their motive for bringing down the towers? Because if they really wanted to destroy the United States, all they'd have to do is sell their American assets. And most likely, that would probably bring down the entire economy. And the question I have is, if Obama doesn't veto this bill, does the U.S., the central bankers, do they want Saudi Arabia to go down this route where they sell the American assets to crush the economy? Think about it for a second. Because they would have someone else to blame for it. They can point their finger and say, look what they just did. And we can see this would fit into their model of controlling the entire story. And we know they're going to be blaming this on another group or another country. How they do this, what they do, we're not really sure. We're looking at the indicators. We're putting the pieces of the puzzle together. And this could be one scenario, because we can see across the ocean they're continually provoking other countries to get into war. And the United States government central bankers, they want to make sure that we know who the enemies are. And this is why they continually use Russian aggression. They're in the South China Sea. And then we have North Korea. Now, North Korea is a wild card. They believe they can provoke North Korea into doing something. And we can see they're continually placing sanctions on North Korea. Now, North Korea, they're saying that they've conducted their 5th nuclear test, and they're saying that they are now capable of mounting a nuclear warhead on a ballistic rocket. Now, there was a huge explosion, allegedly, in North Korea, which created a 5.3 magnitude earthquake in the area of the nuclear site. Now, this is what's being reported. Now, we've heard this before where North Korea had an earthquake, and as soon as the earthquake hit, they say it was a nuclear explosion. The problem with this is that Japan, China, they never pick up any radiation. Because normally what they say is every time North Korea does do something like this, they do detect radiation. So the U.S. Geological Survey is saying, yes, there was some type of little earthquake, and South Korea is saying, yes, we do believe it was a nuclear test. And we have to think about what's going on here. The United States decided to bring in the THAAD system into South Korea, set it up, pointed it to North Korea. Then they decided to have these huge drills in South Korea. Once they had the first earthquake, which produced no radiation because they said, oh, they're testing nuclear weapons. So they brought in all this military assets into the region. They had drills. They brought in the THAAD missile system, set it up, and North Korea is seeing all this. Remember, the United States government central bankers, they don't like a nuclear powered country with nuclear weapons because it makes it more difficult to have regime change. And we can see right now the U.S. is playing upon this. And North Korea is out there saying, listen, we're going to strengthen our nuclear strike force in response to Washington. We asked Washington to sit down and have peace negotiations. Maybe we can work something out. But the United States government central bankers told North Korea, absolutely not. We will not proceed in this way. And we can see to North Korea, they're looking at this saying they don't want peace. And this is all about provoking a country. We see Russia and China, they condemn the nuclear test because they see what is happening. They see the United States provoking this country, and China and Russia are stepping back saying, no, we agree with the United States. They shouldn't be testing nuclear weapons. It's an unacceptable violation of the UN resolutions. So they're staying back and saying, we condemn these tests and we call upon North Korea to stop this because they know exactly what's going on. Remember what Putin said to the journalists when he was giving a press conference, that the United States government central bankers, they are pursuing World War III. And of course, President Obama came out saying that the latest nuclear test carried out by North Korea threatens regional security. So then we have France, which they're calling on the international community to bolster cooperation to go after North Korea. So we can see this is completely building up. And they're going to continually provoke and place sanctions on North Korea until they give or they lash out. And I see it from the beginning to the end. It's exactly what a bully does. Poke, poke, poke every day until that kid who's getting poked by the bully lashes out. And then when everyone sees that kid lash out, that's all they see. They don't see anything beforehand. They don't see what led up to it. They don't see anything else. And this is what we're seeing right now, because the United States government, the central bankers, they know they need to start war. The clock is ticking down. They don't have the time to wait. And we're going to see the provocations around the world accelerate. And it's going to get worse and worse. Now, we know the central bankers, they would like to implement a new strategy called helicopter money, where they just give money to people. They've tested this in the past. It hasn't worked. But they believe it's going to work this time. So we understand that Turkey has a lot of refugees. We know from the Soros documents that Obama, the UN, they were all part of this plan to unleash the refugees into Europe. And we know this was to control Europe, to have people enter these countries, blend them in, and maybe have these countries lose their identity with so many refugees coming in. It's also to control Europe by saying, listen, we will open up the gates, let the refugees flood into your country unless you do what we say. So Turkey right now is trying to blackmail the EU, trying to get into the EU with visa-free travel. And the EU is looking at this and saying, well, maybe not. Maybe you're not right now. So the central bankers are taking advantage of the refugees right now for a test. And what is that test? Well, they're calling it humanitarian aid. And what they're going to do is they're going to create currency out of thin air, and around $393 million worth. They're going to drop debit cards and cash to refugees in Turkey as part of the migration deal. As many as 1 million refugees in Turkey, they will receive the debit cards and monthly cash transfers to help pay for food and housing. And this is coming from the European Union. So the European Union is keeping their promise to Turkey, because Turkey is hosting the largest refugee population in the world, and this was planned this way. And they're hoping that this money will be spent by the refugees and it'll go directly into the local economies, giving a boost to communities that need it. So, how far will 3 billion euros go? Well, we see there's 3 million refugees, so they're going to get about 1,000 euros each when all is said and done. So what's going to happen is more refugees are going to ask for handouts. Turkey will complain that, well, the 3 billion, that's not enough. The refugees will complain that 1,000 euros, that really didn't go that far. EU citizens are going to wonder why refugees are getting the 1,000 euros and they're not. And there's going to be demand for more money to be dropped in this area. But there's a problem with all this. Under Eurozone rules, the ECB cannot simply print money and give it away, because countries have budget constraints. So either taxes go up to pay for the scheme, or the rules have to be changed. They might even do both. And they've done this type of experiment once before, and it didn't go over well. Yes, people did spend at first. Then they started to keep the funds. They didn't spend as much as they thought they were going to do. It didn't really boost the economies that well. In the beginning it did, but after a while it did not. And we can see that this is going to get out of hand. People are going to get upset. And the whole thing is not going to work out. We see Turkey right now. They are planning with the United States to go into Syria. We see NATO right now. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says he welcomes Turkey's efforts in Syria. And we know this was all planned for Turkey to invade Syria. This was planned 2 years ago. U.S. NATO forces with Turkey and the rest of the coalition forces, they planned a ground invasion. This is the first part of it. And we can see that NATO, well, they have built up air force, missile defense, naval presence in Turkey. They increased the military assets in the air, sea. They've also brought in more defensive missile systems, which are deployed in Turkey, because they're preparing for something much, much larger. And we know there's been drills in Turkey with thousands of soldiers. We know the Incirlik Air Base has a lot of the coalition airplanes there, their jets, that they use to bomb inside of Syria. And we know that Turkey is looking at the U.S., saying, let's join forces and go after Raqqa, because they're carving out an area of Syria. Now, Turkey's saying, we can do this. We just need air support. The question is, where is the air support going to come from? Well, we know the U.S. keeps planes at Incirlik. We know France, Germany, Saudi Arabia, they all keep planes at the Incirlik Air Base. And we can see that the European countries brought a lot of military assets into this region. Remember when Ashton Carter went to each of the European countries and said, listen, we need more troops, we need more military assets. Do you think he was just doing that just to do it? No, this was a plan. Their plan was an all-out war in Syria to recapture areas. He went there after Russia was destroying the Islamic State. And yes, the talks are still going on with Russia and Syria. Kerry and Lavrov, they're in Geneva. They're discussing the peace ceasefire deal. And so far, we've heard no word if it went through or it didn't. Most likely, like all the other times, it will probably fail, because the U.S. right now, they have a lot of conditions. And the U.S. really doesn't have a great position to ask for these conditions, because they're on the losing end in Syria. The Syrian armed forces, Russia, they have the upper hand this time. And we know right now that the United States government, central bankers, the coalition forces, they're not going to give up on their goal. And if these talks break down, we can see that they're preparing and getting ready for something much, much larger. Because we're getting to the point where the clock is ticking down. The economy is falling apart. And the U.S. right now is really stuck. And they have no options left to get Assad, to get Syria, then go into Iran, to maintain control of Libya, Lebanon, Yemen, Sudan, Iraq. Because as we know, once these countries overthrow the puppet governments, kick the U.S. out of these countries, it is game over. The petrodollar collapses, which means the dollar collapses, which means the U.S. economy collapses, which means the stock market collapses. Everything is tied together. Everything is intertwined around the world. And one small thing can set it off. And we can see that one small thing might be happening very soon, because it could be something in the Middle East. It could be Deutsche Bank with derivatives. It could be a Spanish bank. It could be an Italian bank. It could be anything. And this is what the central bankers don't want. They don't want something out of left field, because they need to produce a story of why this is happening. They need to set blame on why this is happening. And we can see, as things rapidly fall apart, deteriorate, we're getting closer and closer to that period. And when that time comes, when this system collapses, you need to be ready for it, because there are a lot of things that are going to go wrong. A lot of things that you're going to need. A lot of things that you're going to need that you didn't think you needed. And everyone at this point should prepare and practice. And when I say practice, I mean that you need to say, okay, let's say there is a scenario where I can't get food. I can't turn on my lights. I don't have refrigeration. I can't go to the market and buy other supplies, toiletries and things like that. See if you can make it 1 to 2 days. See if you can make it a week. This will let you know how prepared you are and what you actually need. And at this point, I think everyone should be doing this type of test. Think about it when we have a storm and your lights go out. Because I know what happens to me. You go into the bathroom, you go into a room, you flip the switch, and you're like, oh, through habit, you're expecting the lights to go on. And then you say, I'm going to need a candle here. I'm going to need a light in here. You go to the refrigerator and you say, things are getting warm. Do I have a backup plan? Well, these are the things you need to start thinking of. And I believe everyone should be doing this type of test to see if you are truly prepared for what is coming. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.